One, if we could call the roll, please.
Yes, Councilmember Brennan. Here. Councilmember Lehman.
Here.
Mayor Mars.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting. Here. Councilmember Contreras.
Here.
Thank you very much. Let's all stand for the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, corrections, Mr. Reynolds?
We do have a couple weather-related changes, Mr. Mayor. 9A2 and 9B1, 9A2 being the Republic Services Annual Report, and 9B1 being the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District presentation, will both be rescheduled for another time.
So 9A2.
9A2 and 9B1, sir.
Will be off.
Correct.
Thank you. Counselor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
A second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion passes. Thank you. Item number 4, consent agenda. Mr. Reynolds, any changes?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Counselors? Counselor Lehman?
4B3.
4B3. Others? Others?
I'll move the modified consent agenda.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second from Counselor Contreras. Before we vote on the modified consent, we will read the modified consent into the public record.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. These are the consent agenda items for February 5th of 2019. 4A1 approves the minutes from the January 22nd, 2019 meeting. 4B1 accepts a Minnesota and Cultural Heritage Grant Agreement. And 4B2 adopts resolution number R2019-015, which expresses appreciation for and accepts with regret the retirement of Todd Brinkhouse, who just happens to be our longest-serving employee in the city of Shakopee.
Motion on the table and a second. The modified consent agenda has been read into the record. There would be no further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion passes. Thank you. Moving ahead then to item number 5. Now I'd like to call on a resident citizen that would like to come forward and make comment on an item not on the agenda. On an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move ahead to item number 6, business removed from consent. 4B3, Counselor Lehman.
Mayor, if we could, I thought it'd probably be a good idea to have a little bit of an overview for us and the general public on the proposal in front of us here. And there's a couple of questions that I did have. I'm not necessarily opposed to what's being proposed, but I do have a couple of questions.
Couple questions for Steve?
The first question I had is I saw a proposal last year from the Mdewakanton of possibly putting commercial along the south side of 42, west of 83, for like a business startup commercial corridor for tribal members. Is that still something that's in the works? And if it is, if I'm reading this right, we're taking commercial out across the street, so it almost create like a monopoly area.
Steve?
Mayor and council members, good evening. I think you can all see this diagram, but this is an access diagram along County Road 42 that was schematically developed between the Sioux community, City of Prior Lake, and the City of Shakopee, based on some previous plans and needed access. And specifically to the question of Councilmember Lehman, I think you were indicating in the southwest quadrant of County Road 42 and 83, is that correct, in this area here?
Correct.
So I'm not certain of the land use pertaining to the Sioux community. They have mentioned a potential commercial node here in the southwest quadrant, so that is a potential and possibility. And it would be serviced by a couple of adjacent intersections that would be planned with the frontage road that would be outside of the city of Shakopee and the city of Prior Lake and the Sioux community area.
The points of discussion, this has been discussed for probably 9 months at the city and county level for this PA of further to the east, obviously, of 42. And a lot of our concerns, at least for city property, was access and then the zoning. And in the document, the document, there was great discussion about the landowner coming to an agreement with the county to switch that to more of a residential use. We wanted that access if it was possibly gonna go to commercial. But like I said, there's been active discussions discussions with the landowner in regard to the piece of property that's on the north west side of 17 and 42. Councilor Lehman?
Well, and I'm looking at the red circles. That's existing primary access, and I'm assuming they're gonna stay. And then the Xed out black circle is one that they wanna take away, so they have their spacing between the two reds, but then the two black circles to the right are side by side almost, and they don't meet the 1 mile spacing that's mentioned in the document.
Steve?
So Mayor and council members, so this red circle is the existing interchange. Just as a little background, the existing interchange at County Road 17 and County Road 42. The county has designed that as a higher speed interchange. And this next red circle to the east is at the existing intersection at Dakota Parkway. And that would line up with a full access that would be proposed to service the area in Shakopee to the north here. Now this circle right here was a prior intersection that was identified as a partial or some type of access to accommodate either and or both the north and the south. So at this point, the county prefers to eliminate this. They are proceeding with eliminating this with the caveat that they would be acquiring the access control on the north side from this parcel, meaning that they would basically buy out this parcel to eliminate access directly onto the county road. Therefore, when that happens, this parcel, if you can see where my cursor is here, would need to gain access to the public road system, either to the north from Hohenstein, if I say that right, or to this road, which I cannot remember off the top of my head, but to city public streets that would serve it, that could and would service this property with the flavor of it being a residential property. And that would be the discussion point of, in the current land use, it's guided for, and Mr. Kursky can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's guided for a certain residential that could have a conditional use permit type of neighborhood commercial. But that neighborhood commercial wouldn't necessarily, a neighborhood commercial would be something like a Quick Trip or a convenience store. And that's not very amenable to be accessed through the neighborhood, and it's just not very sustainable to have that type of use without that direct access off the county road. So with the county wanting to purchase that access control, that use would be the city's consideration to amend its land use as it's currently categorized in Envision Shakopee. The Sioux community on the south side, they are accepting of the county's plan here. With the caveat that they would need to work with the county to build frontage roads to service their area to the south. And I did want to make one more point. And so, and to answer the question, speaking for the county in this regard, we've had a lot of conversations over the last year and a half on this. Their main goal and need and desire to eliminate an access point here is because they do plan on improving the northbound to eastbound ramp, having it a larger radius type of ramp that would have a touchdown point very close to this intersection. And when they do that, this intersection is too close. It causes safety issues by having that type of interchange that close to an intersection. So with their improvements to that interchange, they do want to close this access point. So I think I talked way more than I needed to answer your question, but let me know if I missed answering your question.
The spacing of the two black circles that don't meet the mile requirement to the east,
So the two red circles,
further east, the two black circles east of the 42 sign, there you go. They don't make the mile spacing from 83 or each other.
so this is an older diagram. We expect there to be a combination of some type of access in this location. Does it meet the mile spacing? Absolutely not. But the county is willing to be a little more lenient in those strict, real stringent, idealistic spacing guidelines for principal arterial. Most of County Road 42 into Prior Lake and to the east, none of it meets mile spacing guidelines. And these could be modified right in, right out only type access points. But we have worked with the county at this location to have a common city access point that would service both Prior Lake and the city of Shakopee. This dashed gray line, that's the city dividing line. So we're looking at potentially having this circle, this intersection at the common community line. And we would expect it to be a full access point, and the county does agree with that. But there could be something in between this point at the common community line and their County Road 83 intersection. There could be another intersection here that would be a partial access.
Those two black circles, though, are like Steve was saying, are in Prior Lake. I know that Prior Lake was involved in these ongoing discussions, as well as the Shakopee, Minnewaca, and Sioux community, and obviously for the impact of our community as well. So, Councilor Whiting?
Thank you. Mr. Lehman talked about having a little more discussion for the community to understand a little more about what this upgrade to a principal arterial means. Is there, other than the spacing between intersections, is there any other concerns or additional things that are going to happen now that it's going to be upgraded to a principal arterial?
Mayor and council members, so what does a principal arterial really mean to the traveling public? By face value, sometimes the traveling public just simply can't tell the difference. So it really comes down to what does it mean? It means a corridor that's designed more for mobility, almost eliminating as much local access as they possibly can, consolidating that into only a few access points. So ideally, there would be only access points every mile. But that's pretty tough to do in a city that's somewhat developed, has roadways already existing. So what does it mean to the community? The goal of the county is to have a major east-west corridor beyond 169. Their east corridor would be, I'll go to a different figure here. What it looks like on paper is another east-west corridor in the community would be basically starting at 169, County Road 78, going down County Road 17, and then County Road 42 all the way to the easterly limits of the county. So that would be a major principal arterial transportation corridor in the community. The county, what it means also on paper would be it qualifies for federal funding when it's classified as a principal arterial. They can get federal money when it becomes available for routine maintenance applications such as mill and overlay. So that does have significance to the community because then the county can use that money for their maintenance, and they can allocate money for other areas in the community that they would typically might have to allocate to these principal arterials. So that does supplement money coming into the county for roadway maintenance. But really, generally, it's about, to the traveling public, it's about access control and having a more robust type of roadway system in that corridor. It would generally mimic what's been designed for the most part on County Road 21 that currently exists right now as a principal arterial. So you can travel on that 4-lane divided corridor and understand the spacing on that. It's really good with access control. There's not much direct access off it. So there's a balance of Marshall Road is similar, as well as Mystic and Canterbury Road. They're those more arterial type of roadways, so it will have that flavor to it.
Just to follow up, we're talking about County Road 17, Marshall Road. In the future, is there going to be an attempt to try and control more access points on Marshall Road?
That is a good question. So yes and no. So Marshall Road, that is County Road 17. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have every road memorized in the city yet, but so north of County Road 42, the access control is already pretty well set. Ideally, right where this 17 is, the county would like to close that intersection. That's the one where there's a church, and I can't remember the name of the cross street. But in their long-term plan, they would like to actually turn that into like a 3/4 intersection or right in, right out
Duck
only.
Lake Trail?
Wood duck trail?
Wood Duck Trail, yeah.
It connects to Jennifer Lane on the west side.
More of a controlled interchange.
Yeah, they would like that controlled, but that's something where the city will have to work with them on. And I'm talking a specific intersection, just to give you an example. But in that area, when we don't have access on County Road 42 to that parcel that we just talked about, they're going to be relying on this intersection by the church for full access. So ideally, the county would like to limit that, but we will have to work with them on demonstrating why that can't be limited. It's a city street that intersects a county road. The county can't just close it. They have to have municipal consent for them to do that. So that will be something we definitely have to make sure it's important for the county to know that we can't further restrict that intersection unless some other modification would be done to accommodate full access to this area, in this northeast quadrant. So I'm rambling a little bit. So north of County Road 42, it's pretty well set for the principal arterial flavor for access spacing. South, it's not. So that would be the main goal, is the county is setting the stage to extend this north-south principal arterial all the way down County Road 17, where they would engage these same type of access control strategies along that corridor in the future.
So that's something we may want to be thinking about as we grow out in that direction and work with the county on.
Yep, absolutely.
More questions? Comment? More comment, question? If not, thank you. Councilor Lehman?
Do we know if our approval is contingent on them working out some deal with the one property that's got to be rectified?
Steve?
Mayor and council members, if I heard the question right, is the city's approval contingent on the county acquiring that access control on that property? I would be asking you to approve the resolution tonight with the understanding that the county is going to get that access control from that property. I'm pretty certain they will. As part of their County Road 42 project that is underway, they have a schedule for right-of-way acquisition, and this would fall under that hat. They do plan on acquiring the necessary easements and access control over the next year. They have a schedule to do that. They have funding to do that, and they have the resources to do that at this time. So they've committed to doing it. I expect them to doing it. So there's always what if they don't. I would say if they don't, then we will be renegotiating with them on County Road 42 just because it's a principal arterial does not mean that it precludes us from needing an access point at that location. So if the plans fall through and they don't get the necessary access control off of that property, then the city, we would negotiate with the county to figure out a game plan to address the needed access in that quadrant. So just because the city would support a resolution tonight doesn't forego everything.
Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I actually had a discussion with the county administrator on this issue today. She assured me that it was a big priority for them. And I told her frankly that, I had members of my council that were very concerned about this, and she fully understands that, as the mayor touched on and as Mr. Lillyhog has already discussed. We've been working on this for a year and a half, and for quite a long period of time there, the city, because we did not know what our land was going to ultimately be used for, was very clear that we would not be in support of this if in any way it was going to impinge our ability to develop those parcels. So to the county's credit, they looked at this a little bit out of the box and decided that, well, there was a way that they could make this happen, and frankly, that was to buy those rights. So once again, discussed that with the county administrator today, and I feel pretty confident that she'll get that done.
And I appreciate Councilor Lehman's questions and concerns on this. I know we've worked on this a long time. I think if that access opportunity to have the county gain control of access and not have an access point there, then they, for our property to the north, they fully understand that Wood Duck Trail would be significant to us to gain access from the north coming down to the south, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Further discussions, comments to staff? If not, Councilmember Whiting?
Make a motion to approve Resolution R 2019-016, supporting the designation of County State Aid Highway 42, a portion of County State Aid Highway 17, between County State Aid Highway 42 and Trunk Highway 169, and County State Aid Highway 78 to principal arterials, and the designation of the County State Aid Highway 21 to an A minor arterial expander.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Lehman.
Second.
Further discussion, Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, I'm seconding this motion, and I'm gonna support it with the understanding from both our administrator and our engineer that the access issue on the property impacted is gonna be resolved, or it comes back for access. That's my understanding.
That was clear, yeah.
It's taken a lot to get to this point right here with the city. We opposed this for a while, along with the Shakopee, Minnewacan, and Sioux community. And I agree that, like I had mentioned earlier, and you mentioned, if they don't gain that, then we're back in the full discussions on this. Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, a few years back when the interchange was built at 17 and 42, much needed safety improvement. Kind of a weird design, didn't like it at first. It does work pretty well.
Yeah.
It is much safer, especially on a motorcycle. And, you kind of knew then that kind of an investment in that interchange, that the future was kind of dictated by that investment to have these later improvements and capacity improvements. Certainly need more capacity east-west. The map that you showed is a little misleading to the public because it shows the principal arterials really, really wide and 169 really, really narrow. Not the case. It's just a highlight. It's just highlighting what roads we're talking about. They're not going to be bigger than 169.
I think, though, that the idea of where 42 goes through to the east, where that's a 4-lane road, through Prior Lake and all that, that's coming our way,
Well,
right to the end there, that last section.
the greatest example anybody could use on this topic in this area of 42 would be, everybody knows what 42 is like through Burnsville and the 35W, 35E Commons area. We're trying to prevent that from happening
exactly.
here. That's stoplight, 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 stoplight.
Exactly. All right, further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving ahead then to item number 7, I would entertain a motion to adjourn for the EDA meeting. Counselor Lehman?
Motion to adjourn to the EDA meeting.
Second?
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? We are in recess.
We'll call to order the February 5th, 2019 meeting for the Shakopee Economic Development Authority. Madam Secretary, please note the roll. First item is approval of the agenda. Mr. Lehman,
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
there's a motion and second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. We have one item on the EDA consent business. Mr. Lehman,
Mr. Chair, I'll move the consent agenda, which includes the minutes.
we have a motion on the floor and a second by Ms. Brennan. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. General business tonight, we have no business. We have some reports to review, the EDA bill list. Any questions on the bills? Then, with that said, our next meeting is March 5th, 2019 at 7 p.m. There's no other business before this board, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. President, I'll offer a motion to adjourn our EDA till March 3rd? 5th, excuse me.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Ms. Contreras. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
After a great EDA meeting, we will reconvene the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for February 5th, 2019. We will pick up at 9A1, review of the 2018 City Council priorities and city work plan. Mr. Reynolds.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm not going to spend too much time with this. This is essentially a setup for what we're going to talk about next week at our workshop. As you know, and the public may or may not know, every year for the past 3 or 4 years, in January or early February, the council gets together in a workshop format to try to determine what its goals and priorities are going to be for that particular year. I have to be absolutely upfront with you. I'm just astounded and very proud of staff as I review the 2018 City Council work plan. The council provided some challenges for us last year, and I'm excited about where we are with not only what we've done in 2018, but where that puts us for 2019 and beyond. So just really quick, there was a tax decrease last year. I don't know if anybody knew that. I've been saying that on occasion. An actual tax decrease. One of the financial concerns that council has had traditionally, at least since I've been here, is making sure that we retain our status as one of the lowest tax cities in the metro area. Well, congratulations, we remain one. Continued financial stability is another issue under finance, and we had another clean audit, thanks to Darren and his fine staff. And stable tax rate. We actually, once again, for the third year, I believe, third year, Darren? Third year in a row? Significantly lowered our tax rate from 37.971% to 35.231% as part of the 2019 budget. And we had great tax capacity growth at 7.33% increase to our tax base for 2019, so all great news. The one issue that we did not actually achieve, but frankly wouldn't fully expect to achieve until we have the opportunity to go in front of a bond rating organization, and that is our increased bond rating. However, Darren has promised me that we will get this AAA, right, Darren?
I promised we'd have a meeting with them.
But in all seriousness, this is very important because this obviously not only from the factor in regards to how other organizations look at us, top 5% financial stability and financial organizations, municipalities in the nation, but also it saves us money in our bonds. We get a better bond rate. As in one of the other areas as we move on from finance was Park and Recreation, and Park and Recreation has continually been of concern for the City Council in the last couple of years. And frankly, last year, we didn't achieve the things that we wanted to achieve. I think that Council recognized that as an issue, and as such, supported efforts on July 3rd of 2018 to contract with Confluence to prepare a Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Councilor Lehman has been one of the big proponents of this since I've been here, and I'm kind of looking forward to bringing a lot of these issues that we've had with Parks and Recreation forward as moving into 2019 based upon the master planning process. Land planning, we've got great life cycle housing across the board currently in development. We do have two very important long-term pieces that we continue to work out, and that is our river crossing capacity, which we continually are focused on. And you know, whether that is more lanes on 169 or some other avenue for increasing that capacity, we want to make sure that we're available and are in discussions with both the state and the feds in any way to increase that capacity, and we've been continuing to do that, and that will continue to be a long-term goal for the city. And then finally, under land planning is our riverfront improvements, and this is something that has been throughout a cycle of not only our 2015, 16, Nate, when was our last community survey? 2016. So not only was that readily apparent in that 2016 survey, but has also been apparent in our Envision Shakopee plan, and pretty much when we're in public discussions, people are constantly talking about what we're going to do with the riverfront and how to make it more part of the city as a whole. In our economic development and infrastructure, obviously riverfront development is there. We have a parcel on the riverfront that we're currently in the process of having developed, as well as our City Hall site. Those are both moving ahead. Attraction of high-paying jobs. We continue to have several major corporations that we are in the process of trying to wrangle into the city and feel good about them as well. The developer fee and regulation review is something that I want to talk a little more on. This is an incredibly important piece. We just had a major news story in the Star Tribune today that specifically talked about this from a metro cities area. And when we look at it from Shakopee's perspective, the chamber initially had some concerns as well in regards to our development fees, and about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years at this point, they convened one of their committees to take a hard look at it. And I was debriefed from that review, and one of the things that I was very happy with is that our fees in general were very much in line with other organizations, other municipalities. There are some outliers that aren't necessarily our issue, and we'll address those in future future council meetings. But in general, the city's portion of that are well within the levels that we might expect. When Mr. Kursky came on board, I really challenged him to try to find a way to be more efficient and effective and use our tax dollars more effectively when it came to his particular department, and take a hard look at fees. And a lot of times, it's not just fees themselves that are an issue, it is all of the time and effort that it takes on top of those fees. And I'm proud to say that him and his staff have done a fine job this year. Kyle Sabota did great work in his efforts to carve out 120 pages, I believe it was, code into the table, as you are all approved and are aware of. And it took us a while to get that to a level where you were comfortable with, but Kyle worked very hard on that, and it makes it incredibly easy now for anyone to take a look at the code and figure out what we need to do. But on top of that, we had a new sign code adopted, we had a new PUD ordinance adopted, new landscaping and tree replacement ordinances adopted, and a new parking ordinance adopted, all designed to make it easier for people to actually understand what we are asking of them, and more readily use spaces more readily available to develop without so much bureaucratic nonsense in the way. In our miscellaneous projects, a lot of that had to do with two things: transparent communications and community engagement, and then our Southbridge Fire Department. But before I get to Southbridge and the fire issue, we have a video that is one part of our outreach that we continue to do, and we've played a couple of these before, but this is our latest on the community center, and Mr. Tobin is going to show us his starring presentation.
Hi, I'm Jay Tobin, and as Shakopee's Parks and Recreation Director, I want you to get to know the faces and spaces that make Shakopee a great place to live and play. Today we're at the Community Center. We're here because we're going to check out the Aquatic Center. Let's go check it out. This incredible facility gives Shakopee residents a chance to swim, splash, and slide even when it's cold outside. It's also a place where you can learn the lifelong skill of swimming. With me today is Aquatic Supervisor Caitlin Nadeau. Thanks for joining us, Caitlin.
Happy to be here, Jay.
What can you tell us about the swimming lessons that the city offers?
Well, Jay, we offer private, group, and semi-private swimming lessons for kids as young as 6 months old all the way through adulthood.
What sort of things would I learn in those swimming lessons?
So first we'd start off by teaching you the basics, like floating, treading water, and general water safety. After that, we'd move on to the strokes. We've got front crawl and back crawl, breaststroke, side stroke, elementary backstroke, as well as butterfly. Then as kids go through those levels, we move on to competitive swimming skills like flip turns and circle swimming and diving. But throughout all of our lessons, all of our levels, we're continually working on refining our stroke technique as well as working on the endurance in the water.
I know that you have a really talented staff. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, they're awesome. So myself, I've been involved in competitive swimming here in Shakopee for over the last 14 years, and I currently coach the girls' high school team as well as the local club team. And right now I have about 32 staff who are either currently participating in competitive swimming or have had competitive swimming experience in their past.
Why is swimming such an important skill to master?
So living in the land of 10,000 lakes, it's pretty common that you're going to find yourself around a body of water at some point. And I think it's critical that you and your children know how to swim and are competent and comfortable around the water. And swimming it's fun and it's a good way to burn energy, but it's more fun when you know how to do it.
Shakopee residents can be proud of this fantastic aquatic center. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, Jay, this facility is awesome. We actually have 2 pools here as well as a spa and a sauna. Our 2 pools, we have a leisure pool with 0 depth entry. We've got this awesome water feature. We've got 2 slides and we have water basketball, as well as our 4-lane lap pool that also has a climbing wall in it.
How does somebody access this amazing space?
Well, if you're a member, you can access the Aquatic Center during our hours of operation, which are posted on our website as well as around our facility. And if you're not a member, you can come enjoy our pool by purchasing a day pass at our front desk. Those prices are posted online as well as at our community center.
I know there's an outdoor option for swimming too when the weather cooperates.
Yeah, that's true. Over in Lions Park, we have Sand Venture Aquatic Park, which is one of the few sand bottom pools that Minnesota has. And we're open between June and August, so you should come check it out sometime.
Caitlin, I know you and your staff have some Learn to Swim classes starting soon, so I just want to say thank you for taking some time to show us around and talk with us.
Well, thanks, Jay. It was my pleasure.
Caitlin is just one of the faces, and the Aquatic Center is just one of the spaces that make Shakopee a great place to live and play. Come check it out, and I'll see you next time.
That's great.
So that's all done internally, and we're going to continue to give people a glimpse into who we are as a community organization. And, you know, Jay and his staff obviously bring something to the table that, you know, I don't think I would be very good at the role Jay did right there. But, you know, the next, I think we're going to have Steve and his people do a video coming up. I know you're excited about that, Steve. But the whole point is that it's another way of communicating with the public. That was one of the things that it was very clear to council in the last couple of years that they wanted to see not only from me, but from the organization as a whole. And I continue to do coffees with the administrator, beers with the Bill, and Darren and I do the tag team on the before budget meetings as well every year, all which are new at this point. So the final thing that we have is Fire Station number 3, which has been on the list since I've been here. As you know, we had been in talks with the SMSC to try to come up with some kind of a partnership model. I don't think that that's completely dead at this point, but I think it's important that we move forward or at least have that discussion in a more serious manner at this point coming up, simply because I'm not sure that the SMSC is going to ultimately be a partner in the effort. So it certainly wasn't a waste of time to have those discussions, because I think we learned a lot between our two organizations about how we can ultimately partner in the future. But it is a bonding year, so we're going to do something that Shakopee traditionally doesn't do. We're going to go to the Capitol and ask for some money to build our, help build our Fire Station number 3. So expect that in the future as well.
Councilor Lehman?
We're proposing a satellite station like the other stations?
Yes, sir, correct. And the other portion of that is that it will also contain a substation for the police department as well. So, you know, it's an area where the police can kind of check in and have the services that they need as well. So that is a quick rundown of 2018. Now, next week, I would encourage all of you to think hard about where you want us to go in the next year and the next 5 to 10 years as well, because we do want those long-term pieces that will help us peg out those things, such as our 169 access issue. But don't be afraid to challenge us, because I think that we've seen from this last year, I initially thought that the 2018, it was going to be tough to get some of those things under our belt. And like I said, I could not be more proud of this organization and this staff to be able to make some things that apparently easier than I had given them credit for. So look forward to having the discussion for 2019 on next Tuesday night.
Thank you very much for that review of our goal plan, and I encourage you bet for our workshop next Tuesday. Think short-term, think long-term, think beyond yourself for your community when you think long-term, 5, 10, 15 years. This goal plan we've had, been working on that for many years. Another good resource is the Envision Shakopee Comp Plan draft that has some ideas there that were really developed by our citizenry. We did mention that the survey in 2016. Interesting that as you go back and look at when we've really gotten great citizen input, some of the themes that carry forward that they want to see, and I think we've done a good job of trying to implement some of them. But encourage you to come next week with a couple ideas and really think beyond yourself and look at our community in the long term. The short-term ones are great, and I have a couple, but really it's the long-term aspect of where you see in our community over the next 10 to 20 years, so. Great. All right, next up. 9B2, Comprehensive Master Plan Update, sanitary sewer and surface water. Steve, welcome back.
All right, Mayor and council members, did Jay leave yet? No, we're gonna show him what fun is here. Talk about sanitary and stormwater,
Where video again?
things like
Should
that.
have had that on a better day and get better turnout.
But I heard Envision Shakopee, I heard easier, more understandable for developers, and that's really what Envision Shakopee is about. It's to make sure that we have a good, sound plan for the community going forward. So on the technical end, part of Envision Shakopee, there's a transportation component. The detailed technical things for the transportation are actually in the Envision Shakopee plan that is out for public review and comment. There's a land use plan, and then there's the drinking water plan, which SPUC does. And then we have the surface water plan, which is stormwater, and we have sanitary plan. The technical parts are not directly in Envision Shakopee. That's where we hired 2 different consultants to help us with those technical parts of the plans that we expect to be attached as the appendix. And basically the executive summary component will be in Envision Shakopee. But they are very integral parts of Envision Shakopee. Again, the ultimate goal, and specific to stormwater as an example, is we have an outdated plan right now. But now with an updated plan, it will be more user-friendly, it will be current, and when a developer comes here, we're gonna create some very clear guidelines on what they need to do to meet all the different rules that need to be met for the stormwater. As far as the sanitary plan goes, we have a very good sanitary plan with modeling now, that when a developer comes, we'll be able to very clearly guide them on what we need for the infrastructure for sanitary. So I'm not going to take up much of your time tonight, but I have some people in the audience that are going to give a presentation on what we've done on these technical components of the plans. We hired WSB and Associates to do our stormwater plan, and with us tonight is Laura Riscorla. She will be giving an overview of that plan, and Kirby Templin, our water resources and environmental engineer, is also here. So he's here for any technical questions on that end. And then as far as the sanitary plan, we have Mr. Robert Moberg in the audience. He is from AE2S. With further ado, I think we'll just jump right into the stormwater presentation. So Laura is going to come up here, and I got to find my cursor, and I'm going to get you started here, Laura. I think. Drag this over.
Welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Mayor and council members. Thank you for having me. And in full disclosure, I was not the one from WSB to actually work on Shakopee's plan. My colleague who did couldn't be here tonight, but I worked on a number of other surface water management plans for cities, so I trust can give a good overview of what's happened here. So first of all, like Steve said, the surface water management plan is a component of the city's comprehensive planning effort, and something that it's the piece that describes how the community will protect water quality and manage water quantity within the city. This is a tool that helps you meet the challenges of cost-effectively managing your water resources. It's the regulatory document, like he mentioned, that can help give some policies to developers so that it's clear what they need to do to meet city standards. And it's important in terms of grant funding and budgeting, because we'll have a comprehensive plan in here for the water resource related expenses, and then that is a really good tool to go after some grant funding opportunities. So why update this plan? Like Steve said, It's a bit outdated. It's required by state law to update it, and it's typically on a 10-year cycle. And now we can provide consistency between the city's plan and the different watershed management plans. And I'll show some figures at the end, but you can see here that the different colors are the 3 different watershed districts or watershed management organizations within the city. So you do have a number of different players who have rules and regulatory authority. So we'll jump into what this plan contains and how it changed from the plan 10 years ago. Unsurprisingly, there's an executive summary. Not a whole lot changed here. This has basic information and an overview, but there were some new contact people, both at watershed organizations and within the city there. And it sounds like maybe what will be included in the comprehensive plan, so it gives a summary of everything that's in this plan. Chapter 2 gets into a lot of the history and background of water resources within the city. So it describes both surface water and a little bit of groundwater information as well. And here you get all kinds of fun technical data, so you can find out about soils, precipitation, land use, natural resources. You can see those things. And there are figures for most of those. And again, at the end, I'll show a couple of the figures that we've put together. One of the big updates in this section was updating rainfall data. So Atlas 14 is precipitation depth data that came out in 2014 and has since been adopted most places. And so that increased the rainfall depths for design storms. In the small storms that might happen every 1, 2, or 5 years, those didn't increase too much. Where we really see a difference is on the unlikely storm events, so the 25, 50, 100-year events. And compared to the old data, what used to be a 100-year precipitation depth is now closer to a 25 or 50-year depth. So when we're planning for big storm events, there is a notable change in the amount of precipitation we're planning for. There are also a number of impaired waters within the city, and so these were updated. And you used to have a handful of impaired waters within the city or right outside. Unsurprisingly, now there are more of those, and that's one of the figures I'll show. There were some modeling updates that happened. So Shakopee had an existing XP swim model, which is a hydrologic and hydraulic model. So we updated that to include information both from the Shakopee, Minnewacan, Sioux community and from the Prior Lake, Spring Lake watershed districts, specifically for the outlet channel there. So you have a more robust, up-to-date model. And then all the figures now are up to date. So as you may know, there are a lot of organizations that have some kind of role in surface water management or water resource management. You can see a list of some of them here on the second bullet point. So the DNR, Bowser, which is the Board of Water and Soil Resources, FEMA. There are a lot of different players. And one thing that I really like about Shakopee's plan, which is unique to a lot of them, is that your plan lays out the roles of these different organizations and how they work together. So if you or a developer or someone in your city wanted to know, well, what does Bowser do and why should I be interested in their input? There's a nice summary in this chapter, which I think will be a helpful resource. And there are also a number of water resource related agreements, whether that's joint power agreements or others that are spelled out in chapter 3 as well. So chapter 4 starts getting into specific problem areas and issues within the city. And here, not only are the problems described, but some potential corrective actions are also laid out. So updates in this section include water quality. Like I said, there are some additional impaired waters. So those are listed out as well as some actions that can be taken. And degradation of stormwater ponds was an issue that was brought forth by your public works. And so those have been included here as well. Flooding and rate control are often issues. And so those areas with localized flooding or specific drainage concerns are also highlighted, as well as some erosion and sediment control areas. And then pointing out that infrastructure is aging and that there will be a need for some system maintenance and upgrades in the future. So Chapter 5, the goals and policies, gets into some of those nitty-gritty details that developers might be interested in as they are planning to meet your requirements. And so that's here in Chapter 5, and there are a bunch of different goals in here: water quality, quantity, groundwater, erosion and sediment control. They're all laid out here. Shakopee has a design criteria document that was updated in 2017. And so instead of duplicating those rules two places, we reference that document here. So in the future, if something needed to change in your requirements, you can change it in one place instead of two and make sure that those are coordinated. And again, this section was updated to be consistent with the watershed standards. So that's a big effort in this updating process, is making sure that everyone is consistent and incorporates the rules of the related organizations. Almost finally. Chapter 6 is the implementation plan. And so this will get into what studies, programs, capital improvements the city is planning to do and are necessary to meet the water resource needs within the city. Here it includes specific cost information, and you all have a plan, a 15-year plan, so it goes through 2023. And in addition to capital improvement projects, there are also costs included for regular maintenance activities. And so this is the section that really sets you up well to apply for grant funding or partnerships, since a lot of organizations want to see that you've had a particular project planned and have it in one of your planning documents in order to then give funding. So this will set you up well for that. Lastly, and very exciting, amendment procedures. So here, if you ever need to change this plan, you can find out what you need to do in order to make an amendment, and this is consistent with the state rules. So that's not exactly what I meant to do, but I think we can still get there. So here are a few of the figures that are incorporated into the plan. This one shows the different watershed districts or watershed management organizations within the city. And so like I said, you have 3 of them. Here is the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District in the purple. The yellow is the Scott Watershed Management Organization. And these pieces of the city here in red are Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District. So all those organizations have some authority within your city, and it's helpful to know when a project is going in which watershed district it's in. Next, this shows the major watersheds, but then also broken down into some of their sub-watershed districts, so where water is flowing, and each of these different colored areas have different specific outlets. So here, this yellow area, you can kind of see a drainage arrow that this flows towards the Minnesota River here. This is the old downtown area in yellow. The green is the Upper Valley drainage ditch area, and so that flows this way. Blue is the Prior Lake, I think, Prior Lake outlet area, and then that's flowing this direction. And so here, if you're ever wondering, maybe where you live, where different businesses are, where their surface water flows, you can tell from this map. Okay, here are some of the impaired waters within and around the city. And ultimately, all the surface water in the city flows toward an impaired water because the Minnesota River here is impaired. So is the Prior Lake outlet channel here, and O'Dowd Lake, and the others you can see surrounding the city. There are impaired waters. And a lot of these impairments within your city are for aquatic consumption, aquatic life, and aquatic recreation. And then finally, this is the problem areas map. And so this highlights the stormwater management issues within the city. And this was created working closely with public works staff to identify the issues. And so some of these issues, particularly ones on water bodies, are related to water quality, where others are flooding, erosion and sedimentation and sediment concerns, and also some potential future concerns. So this plan incorporates some issues that we see could be a problem within the next 10 or 20 years. So with that, let me know if you have questions. If they are specific, I will direct them to someone else. If they are general, hopefully I can answer them.
So, questions, comments? Counselor Lehman?
In the plan, believe it or not, I've got a boring life. I read the whole thing.
Wow.
In the plan, it talks about impaired water bodies, and 3 of them listed aren't in our jurisdiction. So are there improvement costs in our plan for bodies of water that are impaired that are not ours?
So I have a general answer. If you know specifics, Kirby, you can jump on in.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'll just introduce myself quick, since the first time I'm meeting several of you. I'm Kirby Templin, Water Resources Engineer here at the city. Thanks, Laura, for giving this presentation. So regarding the impaired waters, so there are a couple that fall outside the city of Shakopee limits, but going back to the figure that shows the watershed boundaries of those major watersheds, there are waters within the city of Shakopee that flow towards these water bodies outside of the actual limits of Shakopee. As far as funding allocated towards projects, I think in the plan it's identifying these are impaired waters, acknowledging that, and being a partner in future studies or needs to address any concerns related to those impaired waters. There aren't any specific, I don't think there's specific projects identified at this time.
Okay.
Counselor Whiting?
Kirby, you said that some of our stormwater flows towards those impaired waters. Wouldn't that be also the same as some of those impaired waters are flowing back through the city, like through the watershed, the Prior Lake water outlet?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is that what you meant?
Yes, they're both scenarios.
Okay.
So like Prior Lake and Spring Lake are both impaired. Those would flow through the Prior Lake outlet channel, which then flows through the city of Shakopee. But then there's some water bodies outside of Shakopee. Most of Eagle Creek is outside of Shakopee. There's a portion of it within Shakopee. And then there's some unnamed tributaries to the Minnesota River that have local names. There's one down here, I think it's Pika Creek. So there's kind of both scenarios.
Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, I was specifically talking about Thole, Schneider, and parts of O'Dowd Lake, which they're named specifically, and they're just not in our jurisdiction. They're in the watersheds area, not most of Shakopee's watershed, but somebody's watershed.
And so for Thole and Schneider, so O'Dowd outlets through Thole, and the outlet is ultimately through a series of private and public drainage ditches, wetlands, culverts. So O'Dowd, which we do flow to, does flow through Thole, and then I think there's a small portion of Shakopee that might flow directly to Thole, but so that's kind of how those get interacted. And
But I think Counselor Lehman's question about money, and I see that, you know, you have this kind of lined out in over 5 years in our CIP, and that's fine, but if we spend city dollars on O'Dowell, on our portion, and that's great for the impaired waters, but then if Toll or Schneider are outside, we're not spending money there, but that flow comes into O'Dowell, and whose responsibility is that? Then the watershed districts?
And it's undoing our improvement.
Right, yeah,
You know, and it's Thole Lake.
right. And those impacts, actually, I'll dovetail on that because I wish that we would have had our presentation on 9B1 for the Prior Lake, Spring Lake Watershed District ahead of this, because some of this is interconnected, obviously. But I get concerned about monitoring the watershed is from Spring Lake into Prior Lake, and then they have a channel thing, and then and when it gets too high, they run it down through Shakopee and right to the Minnesota River. And we've talked about it as a council. If more water restrictions come in place, that you gotta treat that water, and it affects our Dean Lake and the Dean Lake out channel. And then we're kind of the end of the line, and someone's gonna say, you gotta treat that water and make it better before it goes into the river. And then we're sitting here with Shakopee going, we're responsible, where meanwhile, this water's all coming from the south, really.
yeah, and so with impaired waters, monitoring and data would be collected to identify an impaired water for one of the several reasons: aquatic life or recreation or consumption. Then they're identified for doing a TMDL study, a total maximum daily load study. That study hasn't been done for all of the identified impairments for all these different water bodies. Some of them have been done, and then there are scheduled dates, target dates that those TMDL studies would be completed. With a TMDL study, it looks at all the contributing areas and communities and creates something called a waste load allocation. And then that requirement or to help improve the impairments allocated to a community. And then that's the target for trying to achieve addressing the impairment. So that, I think, kind of helps with, there are definitely several communities that interact with these different impairments, and that's how it's kind of distributed out to address what Shakopee may need to do to help address some of these impairments. But like I said, not all of the impairments have been identified a waste load allocation for Shakopee.
Other questions? I have a couple. The degradation of stormwater ponds are affecting all communities, especially in the metro area where these ponds have come up and have increased, and there's just more of them now requirement in the last 20 years. Were those ponds under-engineered, or because it's a big impact now in eating into budgets where they're full of sediment and you gotta dredge them out more often than not? And can you comment on that?
Sure, I can try and touch on that. So one of the components of this plan update was Atlas 14. Our precipitation data that we use in the engineering field to design stormwater infrastructure used to use something called TP40, precipitation information. That's been updated, so that would help with addressing like flooding that we might see in infrastructure that was designed for smaller events. So that might contribute to why some basins appear larger now than they may have used to for that flood storage and flood protection. as far as the water quality piece goes, the stormwater ponds for development, the purpose of them is to collect sediment and pollutants to protect the wetlands, lakes, streams. So eventually they will fill up. And then stormwater is an ongoing kind of learning new technologies and techniques to manage stormwater. Instead of ponds, if it's possible, there's infiltration basins, so those can look a lot different. And then as time goes on, we learn more about ponds and how they're functioning and managing over time so that we can clean them out. But stormwater ponds are constructed during development to collect sediment and pollutants to protect wetlands, streams, and lakes, rivers.
A follow-up question that, I live off the Upper Valley Drainage Way, and I think it's a great feature in our community. We have a trail along the side of it that goes through our community, and it talked about now that we're expanding to the west end into Jackson Township, and that's not gonna be adequate, or is it our plan to continue to extend that Upper Valley Drainage Way to the best of our ability to the west to capture that? I mean, that was one of the, when it was first built, it was, this is gonna be a nice east-west channel for water, and it's gonna capture water from Jackson Township and help in that area.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those identified future concern issues. So expanding that as development occurs, that would be looked into with feasibility studies to identify the best way to approach managing that new development and releasing it into the existing Upper Valley drainage ditch. And then that issue and capacity goes back to when the Upper Valley drainage ditch was designed and installed. That was under different precipitation design events. That's all been updated. So there's a few factors that play into that issue concern and the future development of the Upper Valley drainage ditch south of 169.
Two other questions. Laura had mentioned earlier in the beginning of the presentation that one of the things was to upgrade the rainfall occurrences, and the categorization of that has changed over the years. So I'm to assume that with rainfalls and the magnitude of some of the rainfalls over the last 5 or 10 years, actually, the frequency has increased, is that correct? Of major events?
It's a complicated answer, I guess. So frequency is something that doesn't necessarily change. The magnitude that we assign to the frequency might change. I think Laura kind of touched on it. With climate change and precipitation changes that we're observing, there's noticed to be a lot more like 1-inch, 2-inch events, which happen much more frequently than they historically had. The 2-year design event and 10-year design event, we didn't see much changes in those statistics. And then the larger events, we're definitely seeing more of them, which maybe shifted that magnitude of what we used to use design down to a smaller frequency. And then larger events we're starting to see. So
Just seems like there's, you know, they're harder, more frequent rains or that cause and kind of overwhelm our system for a day. And that's why I asked that question about the frequency. Actually goes into my last question on, I spent a lot of time in section 4 where you'd outlined our problems, and you did have a chart here of those issues. And after I'm going through page and page of these pinpoint locations where we have issues, do you deem them big issues or ongoing, and we're looking at some slopes that were wrong and fixes over time, or do you feel it's like a big impact?
I think all the issues that we have in the community vary. some of them are bigger issues than others. The list is just trying to capture all the known issues and documenting them and giving some guidance on what the issue is and then the corrective action. Some of them have been addressed and they're in like a monitoring phase. Some haven't been addressed yet, and it's continued to monitor, identify potential, short-term or long-term solutions. So I guess I don't know if
It's
that.
just when I looked at when I read chapter 4 and then looked at the map with all the stars on it, I went, to me, sitting here at the council, that's a lot of money, right? Because all those are little fixes, and that's where my concerns lie, so.
Yeah.
Other questions? Councilor Lehman?
The Atlas 14 modeling standard change, going to that change, does two things in my mind. The first thing it does is it takes older infrastructure, like the drainage way along the trail, and instantly makes it under capacity because of the new modeling that's been adopted. But on the other side, it takes known areas, and I'll use Valley View Road, which we've improved in the past, bigger pipe under 83. Independence, Valley View. It takes areas like that and puts a bigger light on what could happen, and then you know what capacities you need to prevent that from happening. So there's a good side, but there's a bad side.
Modeling for the future, but we might be undersized
You might be undersized in some areas
from the past.
using the new modeling. I mean,
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to make a change to it, because it may be 10 years before that current size is actually undersized based on the modeling. So you're not going to jump out and just change a pipe size because this study and this modeling says, sometime it's going to be undersized.
Right.
You're going to monitor it and see, okay, if it's at 50% capacity and 3 years later it's at 60 and 10 years later it's at 80. When you hit that 80 mark, you're starting to think pretty hard about, the records are there to say we probably want to make it a bigger pipe.
Bigger pipe. Councilor Whiting?
To
that
go along
accurate?
with that, we talked a little bit about,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that an accurate,
all right, thumbs up.
Councilor Whiting?
We talked a little bit about the growth areas like in Jackson Township. In my thoughts, the hydraulic issues and runoff issues are going to change as development, more parking lots, different things. You never know what we might put out there that could change these things. And also, Kirby touched on it a little bit. With development, we'll have to do some more studies with the map with the different arrows and where the water flows. It may be better to flow another drainage ditch to take care of some of those issues rather than put it all into your backyard. So, just a thought there.
Mayor, if I could comment on a few things too. I want to bring it home and connect the dots here a little bit. So we talked about impaired waters. We have a big map of issue areas in the city. We also have a capital improvement plan built in here, and it's a 15-year capital improvement plan. So it's bringing home what we need to potentially address for the TMDLs that Kirby mentioned to address the impaired waters, all of the issues we have. It mimics the 5-year CIP that we have. So this lays out a longer-term capital improvement plan that we've been talking about over the past year and a half. And then it'll connect it to Darren's rate studies that we have and make sure that that we have the appropriate projects planned to address the issues that we have and to make sure we have a sustainable surface water management in the city. And when I look at the issues that we have, the impaired waters that are either known or pending and future studies to be done, I look at our 15-year capital improvement plan and I match it up with our current 5-year plan. They match pretty good. There's no smoking gun here that says we need to increase our user fees to pay for X, Y, and Z. I would look at it just a general summary that we have a good handle on what the issues are. Our CIP that we currently have in place is set to address some of the shorter term issues we have, as well as we have the stage set for some of the longer term issues too. And I would say we're definitely not broken. We have some issues out there that we'll continue to monitor that we may never fix, but we're going to continue to monitor them to make sure they don't get worse. But I would say to answer your earlier question that our surface water is sitting pretty good. We have a good plan, and we have updated modeling that will help us into the future work with our developers to ensure that when they develop land, including in Jackson and outside the city, that water coming into the city or leaving the city, that we're doing what we need to do for the city. And I wanted two quick examples. O'Dowd is in the city of Shakopee, a part of the lake is, and like Kirby was indicating, it flows west into Thole, and so Thole is impaired by nutrients. So some of those nutrients are coming from Shakopee that go into that lake. So we have to help address that impairment, and eventually the MPCA might do this study and allocate a certain city of Shakopee, you must reduce a certain amount of phosphorus going into this lake, and it will be measured by the pounds of phosphorus. And one more example would be our current project that we brought to you a couple weeks ago for the Government Center. If you look on the impairment list on the Minnesota River, two places it's impaired for turbidity. So it's identified 2018, so that's really recent. They haven't come up with the full allocation and how they're going to address all this turbidity and sediment in the lake, but it is noted, and we are going to the goal of that was to get ahead of it, the turbidity issue, knowing that we have a lot of impairments in the Minnesota River, and to address the potential future development in the downtown area. So I rambled a little bit, but I think in general, our stormwater situation is pretty good, and we have a good plan to go into the future.
Your points are well taken, thanks. Councilor Lehman?
Do we know the turbidity of the water we're putting into the river compared to the turbidity that's already there?
I knew I shouldn't have mentioned that.
It's a wash.
Kirby mentioned that we do certain measurements. So in certain areas, we know that. In certain lakes, we know that. There are Secchi disc type of measurements we take. I don't know if I said that right, but there are measurements in different water bodies to determine the clarity of the water and all of that. So we need to get better in the future on measuring that to ensure that we don't falsely be responsible for our loading, if you will. We don't want to be responsible for Montevideo, Minnesota's turbidity loading that they're causing that go through Shakopee here.
Correct.
So very well put. We need to ensure that we are doing better testing and monitoring so it is fair to Shakopee. Because when you look at Lake Pepin downstream, that's not only Shakopee's fault. In a matter of fact, I would contend that's a very little proportionally of Shakopee's fault and issue down in Lake Pepin down the Mississippi River. So yes, we need to work with the MPCA and all the different watershed jurisdictions above us that Laura mentioned. So more to come on that.
More questions of staff? More questions of staff? Do you have more to present?
Sewer.
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next steps will be, and it'll mimic what we do with the sanitary, but we will be going out for public comment to the watershed districts. They'll be looking at our plan and making comment on it. So that will be the next step over the 60 days with the stormwater plan, as well as letting the Met Council look at our plan specifically. So without further ado, we can move on to the sanitary plan. Did Jay stick around? Yeah, I know he's loving all of this. So Bob is going to come up, and now we're going to talk sanitary. Bob Moberg.
Welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mayor, council members, city staff. I appreciate this opportunity to be here this evening to present this updated sanitary sewer master plan that we put together. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for entrusting A to us to do this effort and to be here to present this overview. I also want to apologize to all of you that, had I known that Mr. Tobin was going to have such a wonderful video here tonight, I probably would have talked to him about seeing what he could do on a presentation for sanitary sewer, but don't think we could have got there. I did see him sliding down a pipe with some water behind him. I don't think that really would apply really well in this case, and I'm not sure that he would volunteer for that gig if we were to try to do that. So why are we here? Just a very quick update overview of what we've done to date here with the sanitary sewer master plan, and kind of some of the next steps we would be looking at, or some things that you folks might want to be thinking about moving forward. So, Steve, am I clicking here?
Yes, you are down there.
There we go. And I guess the other thing I wanted to mention too was I think you folks all need to make sure that you thank Mr. Lilhog at some point when he told me that he wanted me to come down and give a presentation. Of course, I was just chomping the bit to go through all 40 pages of the report and the 15 pages of figures and the 60 or 70 pages of appendices that are in all of this, but Steve felt that that was not going to be a very good use of your folks' time, so we're going to try to be as brief as we can. So, outline, we'll talk a little bit about where we are today in terms of the existing sanitary sewer system, some of the historical sanitary sewer flows that we've observed, kind of the situation that the city has when it comes to inflow and infiltration, and then we will move on into where are we headed. How does what we've done tie into the Envision Shakopee land use planning effort that's been ongoing here for quite some time? Using that data, what does that translate to for sanitary sewer flow projections in some of the growth areas of the city? What would that then mean for a future trunk system? When I talk trunk system, what I'm talking about are gravity sewers that are 10 inches in diameter or larger, or any of the lift stations and associated force mains with them. So this is not a plan that looks at every single 8-inch sanitary sewer line that's in the city. That just becomes much too cumbersome of an effort to do, and it doesn't necessarily give any real meaningful results to work from that. And then finally, we'll have a few conclusions and recommendations for your consideration. What we have here on this slide, a little bit of a composite. All of the information on the left-hand side identifies the last 10 years worth of data. Granted, some of the population numbers are maybe approximations, there may be some accurate numbers in there. And why did we go back to 2008? Because that's the last time that the sanitary sewer plan was updated in harmony with the last comprehensive plan update that the city went through as required by the Met Council. So you'll see population, average annual flow in million gallons per day, the peak day flow in that given calendar year, and then what did that translate to for annual, average annual per capita flows. You'll note, if you look at the difference between 2011 and 2012, I wanted to highlight that, point that out. That coincides with the time frame when RAR Malting had their own treatment facility built, and so they now directly discharge into the Minnesota River. And as a result of that, now they're not bringing their flows into the city system anymore. I've heard estimates anywhere from up to maybe 600,000-700,000 gallons a day is kind of what they tend to run through. So that's a major reason why you would see that drop in average annual flow from that a little over 4 million gallons per day down to about 3.5. You'll also see that the flows, even though population in the city is going up, that the average annual flows are declining on an average basis. A couple of things I will attribute that to. One is the city has made a pretty conscious effort over the last 10 years on addressing some of the I&I issues that you have with leaking pipes, with some of the lining and some of the replacement projects that you've done in the downtown area. There have been some systems right along the river that you've had some issues with in the past that have been addressed and cleaned up. And the other item, if you think about it too, if you look at current building codes over the last several years, all of your fixtures that are going into new homes, low flow toilets, those types of things, that they all tend to use less water. They require less water to function and operate. Well, that then in turn translates to then there's less water that's getting into the sanitary sewer system too. So those are probably the two primary reasons why you're seeing that that drop. I mean, it's a good trend. The other part of this figure you'll see on the right-hand side is, granted it's a little bit compressed. There's figures in the report that would show this a little bit better, but it shows your existing sanitary sewer system. Most of the 8-inch lines we've kind of have grayed out so that we just kind of feature the trunk system itself. And then this also shows the 14 sanitary sewer districts that have been accounted for with the planning. You'll notice that the districts that we highlight here, they're consistent with the districts that have been created with the plan that was done in 2008. But this also incorporates all of Jackson and Louisville townships. And that is very consistent with the philosophy that the city was looking at 10 years ago. The idea being that if there is development that is going to occur in Jackson Township and or Louisville Township, it's most likely that sanitary sewer is going to have to come through Shakopee to serve those areas. 10 years ago, the Metropolitan Council was giving some indication to the city that they were contemplating another treatment facility somewhere further upstream on the Minnesota River. We had some conversations with Metropolitan Council staff back in May of this year, and they've indicated that nowhere within their 2050 planning horizon are they anticipating a treatment facility down there.
No treatment facility over how long?
With it out till about 2050. So I mean,
That's
so
what they
within
said.
that planning horizon, the next 30+ years, they don't envision a treatment facility there. So we took that as direction to mean, well, we need to look at this area again, anticipating that that's going to be coming through Shakopee to the Blue Lake treatment plant. Does that mean it doesn't change? No, it doesn't, but we're just trying to work with the best information that we've been provided by the different agencies, entities.
Councilor Lehman?
Years ago, when they put in the Shakopee-Chaskey interceptor, which happens to go through Jackson Township, could have sworn like 2001 we bought extra capacity in that thing. So we'll have to see what capacity remains in there for development in Jackson Township.
Right. That's why it surprised me. I mean, not that 2050 is far away, but if they're saying no downstream facility,
There's got to be capacity in the interceptor.
continue.
Okay, thank you. So again, that map shows kind of the existing sewer system and then all of the different sewer districts that we accounted for as we went through this exercise. As we look at inflow and infiltration, some of you folks are maybe familiar with these terms. Inflow, which basically is water that gets into the sanitary sewer system as a result of stormwater rainfall events. And that can be coming in through broken manhole covers, sewer cleanout, sump pumps, foundation drains, and rain leaders. Oftentimes what we may see is some of our older building stock, prior to storm sewer systems ever being installed in communities and so forth, a lot of those types of things, a foundation drain, a roof drain, a sump pump, oftentimes those were connected directly into the sanitary sewer system. So during rainfall events, you're introducing relatively clean water into the sanitary sewer system. Infiltration, defined a little bit differently in that's more naturally occurring groundwater that has the ability to get into the sanitary sewer system. It can be cracks in the pipe. As an example, a lot of the sanitary sewer lines that were installed in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even in the 70s were vitrified clay pipe. Pipe typically came relatively short lengths, anywhere from maybe 3 feet to as much as 8 feet in length. Whereas today, most of the sewer lines that are installed are PVC pipe, which is more in the neighborhood, probably 15 to 20 foot lengths. So you've got many fewer joints with the PVC pipe, and also they tend to be much tighter joints, much more resistance to tree roots getting into them and so on and so forth.
Counselor Whiting?
I think a lot of our sewer projects and getting rid of a lot of the Orangeburg and some of those issues over the past 10 years has probably done a lot for that too.
Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, our largest I&I issue in the past was the main line
Against the river.
against the river. And we redid that whole line from over by the old Dairy Queen all the way down to L16. And I mean, what would happen is the river would flood, and it's 5 feet of water over top of our pipe, dumping down the manhole covers that were the old school ones with the open two sides where you can put the pick in there to open them up. And it was just dumping in, and we were paying to treat all that water, hundreds and millions of gallons. And we ended up fixing that whole line and redoing that whole line and making it waterproof to a flood.
It only cleaned up the river water a little bit, huh?
Well, yeah, we were cleaning it up quite a bit, but we were paying to clean it up at the treatment center.
One of the ways, if you wanted to measure yourselves in terms of, how the city rates when it comes to dealing with I&I, the Metropolitan Council, over the course of the last, Steve, probably about 8 or 10 years, has identified a list of communities that they believe are contributing excess I&I into the center sewer system, and they've actually come up with a program of where they were identifying fines, if you will, but if the cities that were potentially paying those fines would agree to make investments in their sewer system, they could then forego the fines. Shakopee has never been on that list. In the engineering community, they're affectionately been known as the Dirty 30 cities, if you will, but Shakopee's never been there, so that gives you a sense that, at least from a regional perspective, Shakopee's not looked at as being a problem child, if you will, with the center. So it doesn't mean that there isn't I&I in the system. It just isn't to the magnitude that regionally it's been a concern. So, and I'll just point out there on the bottom of this slide, kind of the ongoing I&I mitigation plan that the city has engaged in, continuing cleaning and televising sanitary sewers as you have those opportunities, continue with sewer lining and replacement projects as you have the opportunity to do so. Periodic manhole inspection and repair. Oftentimes this is done in advance of street reconstruction or street mill and overlay projects. If you're going to be in doing that type of work, it's an opportunity to look at those facilities. Potentially look at getting some flow meters installed in some critical locations around the community. One of the interesting things I'll point out with regards to your sewer system, you only have two lift stations throughout the entire system. There were 3. There was one over in the Whispering Oaks neighborhood. The city completed a project, gravity sewer extension project last year that basically takes that out of service. So you've got the L16 lift station, which Councilmember Lehman alluded to a few minutes ago, and then there's one over by Walmart. So the vast majority of the system is all gravity, which is great from a operations and maintenance standpoint. The challenge with that can be that when you do have wet weather events, it's more difficult to try to measure just where the problem areas may be. And so it may be something that you want to consider going forward, is looking at maybe strategically getting some flow meters installed. That can be done on a temporary basis. It can be done on a more permanent basis, but just something to think about. And that there's always the opportunity to be adopting new ordinances or different ordinances about, one of the things I alluded to earlier was some of the older buildings in the community may still have foundation drains or sump pumps that are connected to the sewer system. The city certainly has the ability to adopt some ordinances that would prohibit those discharges and those kind of things. So just some food for thought. This figure is basically a replication of land use plan that's been identified in Envision Shakopee, just so you folks have a sense of how that looks. And then again, this is essentially the area then that we accounted for as we were doing the sewer system modeling and so forth. So what I will point out here is that any of the areas within all of these boundaries that are known to be under control of the tribe, we did not account for in terms of generating sewer flow, if you will. So anything that was controlled by the tribe, we neglected to include in our calculations. This slide gives a snapshot of where over the between now and 2040, if all of the growth occurs based on the increase in population, number of households, employment, all of those growth factors that the Met Council puts out there, and also that the city has gone through that and through the Envision Shakopee process. I'll acknowledge, be the first one to tell you that I can guarantee that all of these numbers are wrong, because this is all crystal ball. Whether this things exactly happen the way we envision right now is always open to further discussion and debate. But so just wanted to give you that snapshot, and compare that to kind of what the average has been over the last 10 years. So you have a taste of that. Where are we headed with the future trunk system? Most of the city's trunk sewer system has already been constructed. I would say, it's probably about maybe a 60-40 breakdown. I mean, I didn't sit down and figure out linear footages of new pipe versus existing, but 60-40, 2/3, 1/3, somewhere in that neighborhood. We would anticipate that trunk system will be expanded or upgraded as development proceeds, as the need for it is driven by development. The current system that you have in place has the capacity to accommodate the 2040 population projections and associated land use. The city will have ongoing review of future development that will help kind of guide that process, or the sanitary sewer plan will help you in that process. And then you'll want to continue with some ongoing maintenance, rehabilitation, and I&I reduction efforts, as we talked about earlier. But the key takeaway again is that the existing system can meet the future demands that have been identified in the Envision Shakopee planning documents. Working with staff, we ultimately identified 2 alternatives as far as a total build out of the trunk sanitary sewer system. And what I'll point to, let's see, does the cursor show up here? The key question, or one of the key questions, is there is an existing 24-inch trunk sewer line here that ends at Lusitano Street. I don't remember exactly what the cross street is there, south of 169. One of the alternates that we developed would involve extension of that gravity line all the way down roughly to this point. I want to say this is along Marystown Road, just a little bit north of some of the lakes that you folks were talking about earlier with the surface water management plan. And if that could get accomplished, and that it sounds like because of some of the existing land uses that are in place along that corridor, there could be some challenges with that. Just because, as I understand it, there's some larger residential lots in there, and it may not come together really well in terms of trying to, looking at development through that corridor and then have the ability to extend that trunk sewer line. But if that could be accomplished, the alternative then identified that all of this area in the southwest Louisville-Jackson sewer district could be collected into a lift station and then essentially pumped back into that system. So that's the main difference, I guess, that I identify between this alternative 1 and alternative 2. You'll see that pretty much everything in this West Jackson district is pretty well self-contained, and that would ultimately tie into the trunk sewer line that was put in with the Windermere farms development here in the last year or two. So if you kind of keep that visual and then look at this alternate 2.
Well, just go,
Yeah.
Counselor Lehman?
Well, I can wait until after 2.
Okay. What you'll see here now is that that trunk sewer line does not get extended nearly as far down into this area. And so much of this service area would potentially then drain all the way north, and all of this southwest Louisville area would then ultimately get pumped back into gravity collection system up in here, and then ultimately we tie back into the Chaska interceptor up in this area.
Doing it a different way there in alt 2.
Yeah.
More along 169.
Yeah. So there will be a number, in the report, I want to say, I think it's on page 30 of the report, if I recall correctly, that it's going to depend on several things. One is that, the ability to extend that trunk sewer, that 24-inch line south of where the existing ones there on Lusitano. It's also going to tie in a little bit on timing of development along the 169 corridor, a little bit of even some of the development or redevelopment along County Road 69 that could end up being a bit of a driver here as well. So, as we were going through this evaluation, certainly didn't feel from our perspective that we were in a position to try and predict which one was going to most likely to happen. But so, yeah, I mean, I could throw one out there, but I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it. I'll just put it that way. So, anyways, that gives you folks kind of a high level comparison between those 2 alternates as we went through the evaluation. So,
Yeah.
Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, both of them options require excess capacity in that Shakopee-Chaska interceptor. So
From what he said.
we need to know that there's capacity for the future build-out to be able to go into that interceptor at that point. Do we know what the capacity is of that interceptor today?
I'll give you a 2-part answer on that, Councilmember Lehman.
Speak a little louder when you answer this question.
Okay. The first part of it, from the evaluation analysis that we've done so far, it's our belief that Chaska interceptor has the capacity to handle all of this flow. But perhaps even more importantly, this report has not been reviewed by the Metropolitan Council yet. Seeing as how they have jurisdiction over that interceptor, they're going to take a very close look at some of these numbers that we've put together and the projections and see how that fits with their larger vision in terms of whether or not that's going to be a capacity concern or
And
not.
it also determines further upstream what's going in the Chaska on the north side of the river into that same interceptor.
That's
Because
correct.
if they're growing out and adding a whole bunch of use to it, we're on the receiving end, which is going to take up our capacity, potential capacity. So these are numbers we're going to have to find out.
Well, and that's part of the reason that the Met Council, along with the developer out on that west end, were updating and looking larger at that AUAR, I believe, because they want to see some numbers, but that actually tied into the comment about no future treatment facility for a long time, because when we were working on that West End plan,
They showed one.
they did, and then
Exciting.
what happens if if development happens faster? And they said we have enough capacity for what I believe, for what we want to do here in Shakopee, but they said at some critical time, there'll be a tipping point for them to say, now we need a treatment facility downstream and do it that way, so.
Mayor, if I could interject, so they are now looking at, rather than creating Bob indicated that they don't know for sure yet, but they have indicated that they're now looking at actually expanding their current water treatment plant for the new capacity to the south and southwest and into Chaska, rather than creating a new water treatment plant. So they're looking at expanding their Blue Lake water treatment plant for that additional capacity. So that's why it's important for us to give them this plan so they can ensure they're accommodating what we're looking at with our land use. And I would also comment on the interceptor. They do have a certain amount allocated to Shakopee, and in our current 5-year capital improvement plan, we actually have money that is allocated to pay the Met Council if we go above a certain development in the area. So when we hit a certain level, we have to pay them another $100,000 because we'll be using up that capacity that is allocated. But we won't have to pay that until we get to that level. So there is absolutely a lot of capacity built in that interceptor. But as Mr. Moberg indicated, they're going to have to look at our updated land use and our updated layout of our sewer to bring it into their overall master plan.
Need for that excess capacity.
Councilor Lehman brought up a big point. We're just looking at Shakopee, and, you know, if we were over across the river in Chaska's sewer plan and what their growth opportunities, you know, that probably weighs in there as well, too. Okay.
Right,
Continue.
and to Councilmember Lehman's point too, I guess the other thing I would mention is that similar to what Shakopee has experienced over the course of the last 5 years in terms of seeing your average flows dropping, the more that new development that's taking place in Chaska or, you know, Carver or wherever, going to be kind of the same thing. That at the time that the interceptor was designed, my guess is they weren't making those assumptions at that point in time. They were probably still assuming that there were, you know, more flow per capita or those types of things. And so and as, you know, obviously as communities get at the I&I reductions, well, that frees up capacity as well. So, you know, it's a great question. It's a great point. And that's part of the reason why Met Council got into the regional wastewater treatment business, is because we've got to look at things on a more global scale. So.
Okay, continue.
Just a quick summary here as we look at the two alternates. You'll see going down the left-hand side, these are the acronyms for the 14 sanitary sewer districts, and then the estimated cost of just trunk system improvements. Again, would be gravity sewers that are 10 inches in diameter or larger, or any new lift stations and associated force mains. Not a significant difference in cost here between these two alternates. We don't go so far as to identify funding sources for any of this, because that's to be left to future decisions, whether that's, you know, developer installed, city participates in oversizing costs, whether it's, you know, specially assessed, whether it's, you know, there can be a whole arena of potential funding sources, I suppose, but that was really beyond the scope of what we were trying to accomplish with this. So. Conclusions and recommendations. First and foremost, we believe from the analysis that we've done that your existing sewer system generally is in good condition. We strongly encourage the city to continue with its practice of system maintenance and rehabilitation programs as you have those opportunities. And again, address the I&I reduction efforts as those opportunities present themselves. We would certainly recommend that the city look at you know, a fairly in-depth condition assessment to lift station L16. I believe certainly on the telemetry side of things, the SCADA system and so forth, that there's definitely some needs that need to be addressed there, because the system that's in place is probably reached its useful life, or perhaps even a little bit beyond. And there may be other things that the city may want to look at there as well. Certainly look at expanding or upgrading your trunk system as development proceeds. We would suggest that similar to what the city has done with Jackson Township, that you consider an orderly annexation agreement with Louisville Township. If you're, you know, obviously this plan identifies that it would include, you know, development in Louisville Township.
That's some pretty far vision.
It is. It is. The system, but again, the theory behind it being, Mayor, that, you know, lacking any other outlet, if you will, for where to take this, you know, sanitary sewer, if the township is going to develop, the most likely route is it's gonna come through Shakopee. And it's, there's two different ways you can look at doing that. Well, Louisville, you've got to put in your own pipe system and figure out how to get it to Blue Lake all on your own, or do you figure out some way of working within the system that's already in place to try to do that? So,
Or there's an additional treatment center online at some point.
right. Yeah. And then the last recommendation we had here is, again, consider installing some flow meters at some strategic locations. Now, I haven't spent any time looking at your system to say, well, here's some good locations you might want to think about, but that's.
And without a video.
And without a video, yes.
So back on the I think one of your slides said that our system has about 8%. And you said that we're not on any big top list of industry standard or other communities. Those numbers are substantially higher, especially in an older built-out community, I would imagine.
The other thing that comes into play when it comes to the issue of I&I is it can have an awful lot to do with the soils too. And as I understand it, Shakopee is blessed and you've got a fair amount of sandy soil, which tends to minimize the impacts of I&I. If you've got more clay soil, it tends to be more problematic because the sand will allow that groundwater or will allow that rainwater to dissipate and not necessarily chase along the pipe. What can happen in the clay soils is a pipe gets installed. Typically, it'll have granular or rock bedding around the pipe in that clay soil. Well, that bedding can actually serve as a conduit for any water that gets to it. And then if there's an opening in the pipe somewhere, downstream, or it gets into a manhole or whatever, now it can get into the system. Whereas in the sandier soils, it's usually not as much of a concern. So.
Other questions, comments? Steve?
So maybe a final bring it home word here again. So this is likewise connected to our capital improvement plan. So we saw about $18 million worth of improvements there. The majority of that would be developer funded. The city's participation of that and our costs, we have that projected and would have it long-term to make sure that we have the appropriate sanitary sewer rates in place long-term. Bob, can you flip back to about the second slide? I wanted to make one comment on I&I and to kind of bring that into context. So any amount of water that goes into the sanitary sewer system, it goes to the Metropolitan Council, and they have meters. So they meter it, and whatever registers on that meter, we pay a bill, and that bill is over $2 million annually. Yeah. So, this one here.
Okay, one more.
So when you look at our average annual flow, or actually 2017, 2.8 million gallons per day. But we had a peak flow of 4.7 million gallons. So we didn't all just flush our toilets twice as much that day. That's not what happened. What happened those days is we had some I&I, some sources that we need to pay attention to, because there's 2 million gallons that we sent to Met Council that we're paying for. That's a snapshot of one day, but that happens routinely where our lift stations are running a little overtime when it rains out. So we know when it rains, our lift station runs more, so we start pumping more water to the Met Council. The meter numbers go up, we pay more, because our clean water that we don't need to treat rainwater, that does not need to go into the Metropolitan Council system and into their treatment facility. So it's very important to us to pay attention to I&I, to look at these trends so they don't go up. We have a cap. If we go above that cap, we turn into a dirty 30 and we get penalized severely. So we have to pay attention to this. Bob had a couple slides with a thumbs up. We have a good system, but we have to pay a lot of attention to it because it doesn't take long for one of our manholes along the Mississippi River to fail, and we have a spike, and we're in trouble because we sent millions of gallons of water into our sanitary sewer system. So we're good. We got to pay attention to this. And I think we can even do better. That 4.7 million gallons in that peak day, we should be able to bring that down some. So that's why it's important to put these flow meters in certain areas and try to isolate that. Where are we getting this clean water to come into our sewer system? We can do better. So bringing that home, we have a good system and we have a good plan. We need to now send this to Met Council so they can crunch some numbers and put it into their system to make sure that their interceptor line, which is, interceptor means it's just a big diameter gravity line or force main that pumps the sewer into their treatment plant. That's all the interceptor line is, but we gotta make sure everything is, we're working together on that, so. Thank you.
Councilor Whiting?
You talked about those meters. Do we have a plan on putting those in the budget, or do we have a plan on where we might put them in the system to try and test some of these rainfall incidents on the I&I?
Mayor and council members, and so that's one of the after actions of this master plan is, so we have a long-term CIP developed, and now we'll implement and integrate some of those things into our CIP. And that, Bob and I have been talking about this. We're not required to put these flow meters anywhere, but we feel it's a good bang for the buck to monitor our system and to make some improvements. So we will be including that in the CIP. You mentioned L16. We already have money in the CIP to do an evaluation and do those upgrades. So we will be integrating everything and making it connected into our CIP. Yes, sir.
Councilor Lehman?
I can tell you, we're treating a lot of clean water when it's 55 below zero outside and people are running their faucets so their pipes don't freeze.
Mine froze.
Anything else?
I have nothing else.
Further questions, comments? Great report, both on the sewer, sanitary sewer and the surface water. No further discussion, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, folks.
Counselor?
I'll make a motion to authorize the release of the sanitary sewer master plan and the surface water management plan for the adjacent jurisdictions review for a 60-day review period as part of the City of Shakopee's 2040 comprehensive plan update.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Contreras. There was a lot to read there, and I did find it very interesting, and especially the long-term view of it all. I thought that was great. Councilor Lehman?
Just a general question, not relating to the motion specifically, but somewhat. As we get surrounding entities' comments on portions of our comprehensive plan and these studies, will we get them comments ahead of time for review?
Steve?
No, we won't get them?
Ahead of time, so when we get comments from the different jurisdictions, from Met Council, the watershed jurisdictions, there'll be more requirements. We will share them with you, and we will be bringing these plans back for your approval. But we would expect to integrate those comments from whatever they are into the plan and then bring them back for your approval.
Okay, so
We wouldn't see the comment per se as a standalone comment. We would see the feedback integrated back into the plan.
So when it comes time to adopt the comp plan, we'll have all the comments in the comp plan?
We expect to have, when the Met Council comments, it's more of a you shall do this or you shall consider this. So we will provide those comments and how we address them, and we can give we will give you an overview of what we did and what we did or didn't do and how we addressed everyone's comments. Some of them are, like when you have watershed comments, some of them we need to align our plan, so it's not always cut and dry with watershed comments, but we will give you a good update on that part of it.
Michael?
Mayor and council, so to give you an example, the Met Council did their first review of the draft plan, and there was about 14 pages of comments. So you will not see all 14 pages of comments. So what we're doing is, Joe Whiting, who's the planner working on that, one of their comments was, you can see from the maps, there's broad colors. They want everything done by parcel, so he's going through and actually attaching a parcel to every land use. So we had some parcels that were split in land use, which they caught. So it's a pretty meticulous task, and there were probably 4 or 5 pages of comments along that line. One of the comments was we need an updated sewer and stormwater plan, which you just approved tonight. But all of those will be combined back along with the jurisdictions comments, surrounding jurisdiction comments back into the second or third draft that you'll see.
Mayor, and I'm not necessarily just about the Met Council's comments, but, you know, I'm thinking if our plan is going out to surrounding jurisdictions, let's say Chaska's comment is we're gonna take up 500% of that interceptor in the next 10 years. You know, these are nice comments to know, or whatever, you know, that's kind of an exaggeration, but to find out what some of the surrounding folks are doing compared to what we're doing and how they either fit or don't fit together and how they or us or whoever changes something so that regionally it works, would be good stuff to know.
So Mayor and Council, the county took on the transportation plan. So our consultant worked with the county's consultant to integrate that. So our land uses reflected, the transportation components reflected in all of the surrounding cities. So that was something that Scott County coordinated. As Mr. Lilhog mentioned, they'll be reviewing the Met Council, specifically the sewer plan now, to make sure that, so they have Chaska's plan. Right. They're now going to meet up and see where they have a bust. I think one of the things they've seen, one of the things you saw tonight, is the water flow is decreasing, and so it was built on a model from 10 or 20 years ago. That creates other issues in the sewer system that everyone's going to have to deal with, because the less water in a sewer line, it's harder to move the matter along to the filtration plant. And so if they're looking at expanding Blue Lake, they're going to have to come up with a way to move that sewage from Chaska all the way down to Blue Lake. So there's a lot of things that are kind of out of our control that now will come together. The Met Council will come back probably with, when we submit back, they'll probably have hopefully fewer pages of comments, but we heard from all our surrounding communities, the average page of comments was about 14 pages, so.
But we will ensure that any critical, there's a lot of those technical things that we just need to take care of. But if they're critical to the plan, and we will ensure that we inform you and share them with you for sure.
All right, back to the motion. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all. Moving ahead, 10A, city bill list for our review. 10B, liaison administration reports. Councilor Brennan.
I went to the Shakopee Chamber annual meeting luncheon, and Michael Clem was sworn in as the chairman of the chamber. So everybody was sworn in also. So that was a good informational afternoon. Also went to the Municipal Legislative Commission and met with Senator Pratt and Representative Tapke to learn what they were going to be doing in the region. And went to the League of Minnesota Cities newly elected officials training. And I got to say, we have a good council here that's very informed and doing a good job at communicating. And because we saw a council that was just awful. That was their I don't know what, their pretend council, and they were terrible. So we're doing a really good job. So that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Lehman.
Attended SPUC on Monday. They approved a couple of city projects. SPUC picking up the oversizing on the water lines on city road projects that were before them. They had a presentation by MMPA of MMPA's year goals and accomplishments. I actually have a copy of that. It's kind of a slideshow page form. I'll give that to the city administrator to share with you. It was pretty interesting. If I remember right, it was 100% renewable. Was it 5 or 7 years? Not Shakopee Public Utilities, but they get their power from MMPA, and MMPA is going to be 100% renewable, 5 to 7 years, if I have it right. A lot of that is hydro from out of Canada, that they're buying electricity from a big hydro plant and there's some wind stuff going on too, somewhere in Minnesota here that they didn't want to disclose location publicly just yet. The only power outage was the 4-second blink. It's officially a 4-second blink, even if your power just went blank. On their monitors, it was 4-second blink. Wasn't necessarily a power outage, nothing was spuck. It was actually caused by some issues with Excel bleeding into the system. And we all saw with the deep freeze, the problems Excel was having. Power lines stretching, falling down, and some capacity issues, both on the natural gas side and the electrical side. And that bled into some of our systems and caused that blink. So that's all I have to report on spuck at this point.
Thank you. My report, I've met with staff. I also attended the Canterbury relaunch. They've redone their conference or exhibition halls. Looks real nice. We have also new catering things. I too attended the 2-day seminar for the League of Minnesota Cities for experienced officials training. I'm going to bring some literature to council. I didn't do it tonight because of the commute, but I'll have that available. I thought it was very great learning and update, talking about leadership styles, and that's all my report. Councilor Whiting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last Wednesday, we had the MVTA meeting. We did the executive director review. We also approved paid parental leave of up to 6 weeks at 60% pay. And this Saturday is the Lions Club of Shakopee's ice golf and pond hockey tournament. If you're interested in joining, you can join. You can pay at the door. You can still get in. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Contreras?
I attended the SDA meeting where I did resign my position of vice president, and now they're looking for board members. Anybody who's interested, last Thursday of every month at 6 here at the City Hall. And I also attended the League of Minnesota Cities for the newly elected, and like Councilor Brennan said, we are doing a very good job. We're not on our phones, and we are paying attention, and we're focused, so we're doing a great job. That's it.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Reynolds, with the administration report.
Nothing from administration, sir. We're good.
Oh my gosh, all right. Well, that is fine. Councilor Lehman, item number 11, other business.
You know, I was going to bring up one thing, but I thought I could probably wait, but since you asked, I'll bring it up. Under the city bill list on the first mayor and council, we use 16% of the budget in the first month of the year. Boy, them new gals on council are expensive. Ooh.
We're gonna gavel that one in.
I wanted to point out why that is.
All right.
And my understanding, and our financial wizard over here, Darren will correct me, but a lot of our dues are paid right away out of the council line item. So we'll see that number probably go up. And toward the last half of the year, all the dues that were all in, last half of the year, they're already spent at the beginning, so they'll match at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It wasn't me.
No,
Me neither.
just kidding.
Okay, so any other business? If not, Counselor Lehman.
Motion to adjourn to the 12th of February, 7 PM for a workshop.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn to February 12th, here at 2019 at 7 PM. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:15.
18th.
Is this for that?
These are mocks. Those are mocks.
I know, I guess they didn't show up.
Well, that's Todd's resolution.
They all disappears.
What do you do?
Maybe we can be leaders in that.
I know like short-term disability pays for,
You get 12 weeks, but it's not paid.
but if you have short-term disability,
Yeah, you
covered.
can do that.
Oh, I broke my arm. My wife.
Oh, whatever. He's so full of baloney. No.
Ultimately, it was my wife's fault. I fell off a ladder.
Were you told to take a
Yeah, it was the end of the radial bone snap, so. Yeah. Yeah, well, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ouch. Couple of choice words.